Hello, and welcome to today's briefing on USDA Hurricane Recovery Resources Update for Agriculture Stakeholders. My name is Tammy Wright, and I'll be your moderator this morning. And let me first say thank you for joining us today. Before we begin, just a few reminders about Microsoft Teams Live event functions. Teams Live events, it allows us to share one-way video and audio with you. And if you would like to turn on closed caption, select caption/subtitles on in your video controls. And if you need to pause the meeting, click the pause button found on the lower left corner of your screen. And you can click the button again to play from where you left off or to jump to real time by clicking live, which is located next to the play button. We are recording this session in case you experience technical difficulties. And for any people who are unable to attend today's event, we will make the recording available on farmers.gov/hurricane in the next few days. It will also post it in the chat before we close. We will have a chance to answer a few questions after our remarks. To ask questions, type your question in the compose box at the bottom of the Q&A pane. Then click on the arrow to submit. If you prefer to ask your question anonymously, your name will be optional and you can leave it blank. Then select post as anonymous before you send your question. Today's session is the second in a series. Previously, the Farm Service Agency, Natural Resources Conservation Service, and Risk Management Agency. They walked through the recent flexibilities for those affected by the hurricane, and that recording can be reviewed on farmers.gov/hurricane. Now, join me in welcoming Farm Service Agency Senior Advisor, Scott Marlowe.
Good morning, and welcome to our webinar. We'd like to thank all of you, the farmers, ranchers, stakeholders, USDA staff, all of you who are joining us from across the country today. And for those of you who are in the areas affected by the recent storms, please know that you have our support. We will be here for the long haul and to provide the assistance that you need and to be partners in recovery over time. Today we're here to talk about USDA's assistance and as we said last time, we covered some of the flexibilities we've been able to do. On this call, we're going to give a few updates on those flexibilities, but we're also going to dive a little bit more deeply into some of the programs that folks asked questions about so much last time. Mostly those programs designed for assistance with debris removal and land rehabilitation on working lands and forests, like the Emergency Conservation Program, Emergency Forest Restoration Program, and then also programs for livestock and poultry losses, including the NRCS program of Emergency Animal Mortality Management and FSA's Livestock Indemnity Program. Once again, as we talked about last week, we encourage everyone to fully document all of the damage and losses as best you can. We recognize that many of your records may have been lost in the storms. They may be unattainable, but at this point, and we will work with you to put together whatever we can to recreate or to replace those documents. But we really encourage you to keep records now of both what is present on your farm, what the current situation is, and also what you're doing and what you're spending in order to recover. In any case, though, we really encourage you to contact and stay in touch with your USDA Service Center. We will work with you. The folks in that Service Center will work with you over time. That is going to be your main point of contact, your main way of accessing these programs. And we encourage you to stay in touch with them over time as things may change, as we find additional flexibilities and as our programs come online. With that, and for an overview and an update on some of our programs, I'd like to hand off to John Burge, the Acting Deputy Administrator for Farm Programs at FSA.
Thank you, Scott, very much. Tamara, thank you for helping moderate as well. So we wanted to we wanted to provide a little bit of information about the disaster designation process. This process is an important one because it allows for us to provide two immediate points of assistance. One of them is our emergency loan program, and the second is the disaster set aside. And previous to these most recent disasters, that program was a little bit cumbersome as it related to the presidential disaster declaration. So now we are implementing the presidential disaster declarations upon FEMA's approval of individual and/or public assistance in counties affected by hurricanes to help producers recover from disaster events. That sort of breaks through a little bit of the delay that we had recently experienced with other disasters. In the absence of those presidentially declared disasters, we have also leveraged what is called the Administrator's Physical Loss Notification in affected counties suffering from physical losses. This would be buildings, structures, and livestock, to also support those same emergency loans and disaster set aside. And then we are also working with the individual states, both as a result of this most recent storm in Milton, but also the previous storms of Helene and Debbie, to collect that information for secretarial disaster designations as well, to cover those areas that were not covered through the presidential disaster designation or the APLN. The Emergency Assistance for Livestock, Honeybees, and Farm-Raised Fish, ELAP, probably the worst acronym that we have at USDA, is an important program that we have flexed to assist producers with issues related to forage. So ELAP will assist with grazing losses due to hurricane and flooding, eligible on affected acres up to 180 days of grazing for all non-federally managed land. ELAP, pardon me, provides assistance for purchased and produced feed losses due to hurricanes, and feed purchased above normal due to hurricanes is also eligible for ELAP assistance. The ELAP reference assistance is limited to the value of the acres lost due to the hurricane and the number of livestock a producer had at that time of loss. We've authorized the eligibility of ELAP transportation assistance in hurricane impacted states to assist with normal costs to transport livestock to feed and/or transportation of feed and forage to livestock. That reimbursement rate, incidentally, is $6.60 per mile. We've also authorized water hauling assistance to get water to livestock as well, and that reimbursement rate is 10 cents per gallon hauled. Late filed applications are always accepted and always considered by the county committee, but in order to provide ease in the reporting, the deadline for application for this program or for these bits of assistance is January 30th of 2025. Tree Assistance Program is another program that we have flexed for this disaster. The TAP program provides financial assistance to eligible orchardists and nursery tree growers to replant or rehabilitate eligible trees, bushes, and vines lost by hurricanes and other natural disasters when the tree, bush, or vine is the means of production and not the product. TAP assistance extends to trees, bushes, and vines that have not died but are no longer capable of production as well. Producers also have until January 30th of 2025 to submit a notice of loss. So I think that there were a number of questions on the last call talking about the clearing of land. So I'll be covering two items: the Emergency Conservation Program, commonly known as ECP, and the Emergency Forest Restoration Program, EFRP, and then I'll turn it over to my colleagues at NRCS. ECP provides funding and technical assistance for farmers and ranchers to restore farmland damaged by natural disasters. We immediately authorized an extended ECP sign up beginning October 15th, 2024, running through June 1st of 2025 in the states affected by Hurricane Helene. Producers that were impacted by Hurricanes Debbie and Milton should contact their local FSA office for ECP sign updates and details. To support the critical disaster recovery efforts to farmland and privately owned forest land As a result of Hurricane Helene, we provided the following flexibilities for ECP and EFRP. These are important items that I know have been of interest. We waived the on-site inspection to expedite determination of need and approvals of restoration work for all ECP practices, with the exception of engineering practices. And that, just to note, engineering practices disturb below the soil below the plow level, including pond embankments, dams, and buried pipelines. For all EFRP forest types, to remove hazard trees up to 100 acres aggregate. Restoration plans are required for all of our activities, site prep, planting, etc. In addition to waiving the on-site inspections, we also authorized an additional flexibility to assist with participation in this program. We're foregoing the requirement of a producer to request for works prior to submitting an application for a certain emergency non-ground disturbing activities. This is outlined in our ER 850 process at FSA. That would include surface debris removal, fence repair, and hazard tree removal up to 100 acres aggregate. These are just some examples of ground disturbing activities that would result in additional environmental screenings. This would be stumping or removing tree roots, removing non-hazard trees, burning debris, disposal of debris, sediment removal, and anything that results to impacts to a water body. That would be a wetland, a floodplain, riparian buffer, etc. Those would require some additional environmental screenings. And as mentioned earlier, and I should read this, what participants are always encouraged to submit dated photos, GPS points, imagery, maps of the impacted areas. Both of those referenced policies apply to all USDA employees requesting ECP or EFRP assistance and will apply to late filed applications filed within 30 days of the end of the sign-up period associated with the referenced disaster event. I will turn it to my colleagues at NRCS.
Good morning, everyone. And as you can see, the debris cleaning land rehab for NRCS. NRCS may offer the disaster-specific assistance opportunities to address resource concerns. First, for NRCS, and I know it's a challenge when you're having, you're dealing with a disaster, one USDA agency and multiple programs. But for the NRCS programs, applicants are asked to submit an application for that disaster-specific sign-up. States will, if they haven't already, will be announcing dates for sign-ups soon. But it's difficult to get applications in when you're in some of our locations. You don't have a local field office. Who do I contact? Our USDA offices are working with applicants that we have on hand. As far as the applications, we've done previous work with producers, so not only are we asking the producers to contact the USDA Service Center, we're also asking our staff to begin reaching out as well. We do have employees that live in those areas. They're having challenges as well, so we're wanting to make sure that we do have applications to cover any work related to the disaster relief here. Once we have an application in hand, early start waivers can be made available to eligible applicants. But to provide that flexibility, we want to make sure we don't have to circle back at any point. Applications can be taken, whether it's a phone call, email, text message. We're just trying to make sure we have enough documentation on hand to say we have an application in hand. We've heard from several producers. It's been difficult to communicate. I think things are coming online now, but some actions had to be taken immediately. So we're wanting to make sure we have that documentation in hand. NRCS can also provide flexibilities if you have existing contracts, practices that may have been completed, practices that may have been partially completed and then destroyed. Participants need to definitely make sure they're working with their local field offices, identify the impacts, identify the challenges that you may have with current contracts, and we have provisions to work through those. So let's talk a little about the livestock emergency animal mortality. So from disaster to disaster or our catastrophic events, emergency mortality management, the ability for producers to deal with the animal carcasses during a catastrophic event. This is basically for us to reduce any of the impacts to surface and groundwater. So these are the resource concerns that we are addressing with through EQIP and the use of the emergency mortality management. The practices that's associated here are typically not applicable to disease or routine mortality management. We have other practices that deal with the routine management or of any type of mortality. But when we're talking about a catastrophic event, this is what spearheaded the conversation of making sure we have applications on hand before we're having to take the proper methods of disposal of any carcasses. So as I mentioned earlier, making sure we have a application on hand. We've instructed staff to immediately, once you have that information you need for the application, immediately issue the early start waiver so then producers can begin to take action. Keep in mind in a couple of bullet points here, work cannot begin on any practice prior to receiving their early start waiver. Waivers do not guarantee a contract or payment. It does allow you to begin work earlier or as soon as possible, but we have to make sure all the eligibilities are in place before any contracts or payments are issued. And then all practices and activities completed must meet the standard and specifications of NRCS. When we're addressing mortality, burial sites. We've had a lot of flooding. Depending on the location of some of these operations, we definitely need to make sure the burial sites will avoid contaminating groundwater. So working through your local state offices, USDA service centers, making sure we have the right soil activities performed prior to those burial sites. And then the on-site visit is required for planning of any of these practices. That's going to be challenging in some areas, some locations. So we're working with our staff to ensure that if we're unable to get there, what are the options for producers? As far as the layout of how we want to make sure we're documenting everything, an on-site visit is required. Practices will need to comply. Again, we mentioned earlier NRCS standards and specifications, but they also need to make sure they comply with state and local regulations as well. Some of the disasters, some of the locations, there are state laws that apply when it comes to how to handle mortality, what action or timeline you have to be on to handle that mortality. We visited with our states here a couple of times already, just to make sure we have everything aligned so that they can take the application, get the action started, and then we go through the steps of filling in the blanks afterwards. So before I turn it back to FSA, just want to kind of reiterate a couple of points when it comes to EQIP. EQIP is, we utilize the animal mortality management as kind of that emergency action within EQIP. There are a lot of steps that can be taken. There's going to be a lot of site-specific situations that are happening with our producers. We want to make sure we have an application on hand. It does not mean you're going to be taking immediate action. It does not mean that the things that you're looking to implement will be implemented in the next 60 or 90 days. It could be something over the next 12 to 24 months. But we want to make sure we have it documented that it happened as a result of one of these disasters. That way we can make sure that those areas are granted the priority that's needed to address those resource concerns. We've had a lot of situations, and we've seen those on the news, where erosion has happened at a large scale. So it's going to take a lot of not just land leveling, could be engineering type work that to restore those sites. But we want to make sure we have that application. If nothing else, that application is your first start of that conservation planning, the site assessment, so we can have a record to make sure we are visiting with every one of our producers that have been impacted through these disasters. So I'll stop there, turn it back over to FSA, and we'll address any questions you may have in a few moments.
Thank you, Jerry. Wanted to provide some additional clarity on the livestock indemnity program. For those of you that are unaware, the livestock indemnity program provides benefits to livestock owners and contract growers for livestock deaths in excess of normal mortality caused by eligible loss conditions, including eligible adverse weather. That would include this particular disaster. Firstly, FSA will not penalize producers for taking steps to end the suffering of animals caused by natural disasters. But law does require that losses are appropriately documented to attribute those animal mortalities to the natural disaster. Animals injured by the hurricane or other related events that are sold within 30 days of the disaster at a reduced rate also qualify for LIP assistance if the 2024 LIP price is higher than the sale price. Late filed applications are always accepted, but as mentioned previously about ELAP, we've also extended this deadline to March 3rd of 2025 for 2024 losses. LIP assistance also extends to contract growers of poultry and swine and other confinement livestock in cases where the contract specifies that the producer has ownership or a financial interest in the livestock loss and shares in the risk of production. We also have issued guidance to our county committees and to local staff to make sure that we're exercising maximum flexibility in determining loss documentation to ensure that LIP applications are acted on timely. This is important to note. We know that in a circumstance like this where we've got flooding, we may not know about losses for some time because carcasses may not be identified soon. We know that records can get lost or damaged or destroyed. So we have directed our county committees and our local staff to work with producers to reassemble records to adequately document those losses. These are some important resources. Obviously, your local office is your best entry point to working with FSA. If your local office is closed, we have transferred those phones largely to adjacent offices, but you're always welcome to use the FSA hotline as well. That's listed here on the slide, but if you're writing things down, 877-508-8364. Up-to-date information is also available at farmers.gov/hurricane. Provides disaster programs at a glance, disaster assistance discovery tool, loan assistance tool, and you can also sign up for news updates there as well. And I think we're turning it back to Q&A, Scott, so I'll turn it back to you.
Thanks very much. I want to remind folks that if you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A tab. We're monitoring that closely. And actually, John, I'm going to come right back to you pretty quickly here. A couple of questions about ECP and EFRP. Can they provide assistance for rental costs associated with heavy or light equipment that's needed for removal? And then also, do farmers have to work with a contractor? Does it compensate the labor costs associated with running that equipment?
The short answer is yes. So both ECP and EFRP provide assistance for rental costs for both heavy and light equipment, and we also compensate for labor costs associated with running that equipment.
And is there a requirement? Do they have to work with a contractor? Or can they do the work themselves and get compensated for their own work?
Sorry, I missed that part of the question. The answer is no, they do not have to work with a contractor. You can do your own work and provide a documentation for reimbursement, or you can work with a contractor and provide that documentation for reimbursement.
Thank you. We're going to go over now to Jerry Rayner. A question for NRCS. Will EQIP emergency be authorized in North Carolina?
Yes. All of the states that have been impacted will offer EQIP and whatever emergency provisions come with that. Again, I want you to keep in mind, and I stated it earlier, immediate EQIP actions are those of animal mortality, addressing the mortality issues there. But as far as an immediate response to any of the other conservation practices or addressing those resource concerns, the emergency part, please sign up, please submit your application, have a visit with with your local service center to address those needs. Let's get your needs documented. And I think because if we're speaking of cover crop or mulch, depending on the type of practice and what we're looking to correct, those practices are available through EQIP, so they can address a resource concern at any time. The emergency for NRCS and EQIP is how quick do we need to address those resource concerns, and that's going to be, again, I mentioned earlier, kind of different from operation to operation, and it just depends on what that particular producer is looking to do immediately.
Thank you, Jerry. John, we're coming back to you for a follow-up question on EQIP. In terms of the equipment used for cleanup, is it just the rental costs, or is there funding for farmers to actually purchase the equipment if needed? And John, I apologize, you're on mute.
I just got off mute. I was having a difficult time. Bear with me just a moment on Scott. Scott, let me verify that, and I'll come back to you.
All right, and while we're there, the same question about cover crops and mulch is restoration. If in the restoration of the land are practices that restore fertility, like cover crops or mulch, are they eligible under ECP as well? And I'll remind folks that if you have questions or things that you'd like to ask, please go ahead and put them in our please go ahead and put them into the chat. Jerry, let me come back to you for a moment, if it's okay. While John's checking on that. We had a question about EQIP. Will the sign up for EQIP be extended beyond the November 1st deadline? Yeah, that's the question. Sorry.
So EQIP has an ongoing sign up. And if we're speaking specifically for disaster, it is ongoing as well. We're not looking to have a immediate cutoff date. We would like to have those applications as soon as possible. But again, we're actually making sure that we document whether this, locations, states, counties, are these areas impacted by any of the disasters that we're talking about here. So if we get an application immediately, if we get one after November, we will be able to address those. We're working to address those resource concerns accordingly. The reason for the distinction is to make sure we are actually letting USDA and Congress know that through these programs, we have the ability to impact, disaster from the standpoint of how do we repair, how do we reestablish, how do we get producers back up and running, on their feet, just depending on their situation. So we're having to make sure that we compile these applications. Some states have possibly already announce those deadlines. But if you have applications that come in after that deadline, we just need to make sure you let us know that, yes, I'm in an impacted county. If we don't make that distinction on your application, or we don't ask that question, we need to be able to make sure that we're putting these applications in the right bundle, because the funding that's being made available for disaster through EQIP will actually be a separate pot of funding that these producers would have access to. So that's why we're wanting to make sure we have those applications in those particular categories.
Jerry, let me stick with you for just a minute.
Yes, sir.
One of the questions was, with the extensive erosion that's happened in this this event, in the
Yes,
recent
sir.
events, there's a lot of concern about stabilizing and starting the process of returning fertility and those types of things. If someone is looking for that assistance, really needing to get it started and looking for that assistance in the next 30 to 60 days to really get jump started, what do they need to do to make sure that they're still in line to get the assistance, to make sure that they're complying? And sort of the follow-up to that is, with the early start waivers, one of the things that you said was the early start waivers don't guarantee contract approvals. Are there situations where they could get an early start waiver but then not get the funding for the work? So just what would you tell folks who are trying to navigate this early start and the sense of urgency for restoring the stability and the fertility of their land, and still need the assistance in EQIP?
First start, I mentioned earlier, visit the local service center, make sure you have an application on hand. With the application, we can then issue an early start waiver. Now, the application nor the waiver guarantees that you will get a contract. Each producer that applies they have to meet program eligibility, and that's land eligibility, that's producer eligibility. And if that is met, then the next step would be moving toward a contract. And I know some of the steps may need to be immediate. We've got erosion concerns, you're trying to stabilize things, but making sure that even NRCS, if we have the ability to get on site, we may have to do things, guys, we got technology. If we can't get to the site, we may have to do it virtually. We may end up having to FaceTime to see some of these things. Some of that type work will require engineering design. So having to work through all of those hurdles to say, let's move this quickly. Each state will have the ability to address those things in a different time frame. But I want to go back and emphasize, make sure you have an application. If you're looking to begin immediately, make sure you have your early start waiver, and then follow up to complete all the eligibility activities for land eligibility, as well as your producer eligibility. And with those, with those three things in place, still, guys, I can't sit here and say we're going to guarantee that you'll get a contract, but the opportunity is more favorable when you get through the eligibility and you meet the eligibility requirement. So, and you asked the question, could there be situations that they went through all of those steps and still did not receive funding? If a producer does not meet the eligibility requirements, that would be a situation in which they may not receive funding. But again, once you submit that application, and the eligibility determination, we work with, NRCS works with FSA on that eligibility. I do want to circle back, because as you mentioned earlier, ECP and EQIP, NRCS and FSA are working together to address resource concerns on the landscape. So as we're doing, as we're visiting with farms and doing assessments, and I know FSA, a few of their practices do not require assessments, but we are working with our staff to visit the site. What applies to ECP? That's an immediate action. That's a separate action that can be taken. And if there are things that will not apply to ECP, Now we have EQIP that could possibly come in and address the remainder of the concerns on that farm. So we feel like we have a place to put most of our concerns, but a lot of it's going to just take the opportunity for us to visit with you.
And one last follow-up, Jerry, and then we're going to switch back over to John and FSA. One last follow-up, which is for emergency EQIP in these situations, is this in the regular pool of EQIP funding? Are they competing against everyone else in EQIP offers? Is it a specific pool of funding? And if so, how much is currently in the emergency EQIP funding, if we know?
Each state has their emergency funding, and as they're making their announcements, they typically make that announcement. But as far as the competition, you're not competing with everyone else in the general EQIP funding. We do set those funds aside for disaster response, and those particular dollars are made available to those producers. We work within our EQIP authority limits. And right now, I know on hand I have a request for about $50 million of disaster work, but we are anticipating that exceeding that, far exceeding that. Just looking at some of the and hearing from some of our producers the amount of damage that's being caused by the past couple of storms. But again, just to reiterate the fact of those funds are separate, so you will not have to be competing for those. The states that have been impacted, we visited with those states, and they all have their amount of funds set aside. I can't speak to any particular state because they're addressing those at the local level. So I'll leave it right there. There should not be any competition with other EQIP funding.
Thank you very much, Jerry. And as we start to transition back to FSA, let me pick up just one or two things that are coming out of the questions. In many of the states, one of the questions is the plans to increase staffing in the affected areas to provide application assistance and site visits. And several of the states, at least within the state, staff have started to be matched up from non-affected parts of the state to be able to assist folks who are actually in those disaster areas to begin to work through applications, to work with them, to provide support. It's already, that kind of virtual assistance is already taking place. We're developing plans for what needs to be done in terms of direct, getting people on site. But there's a lot that's already happening in terms of, virtual assistance coming from either other parts of that state or other areas. We anticipate that ramping up over time as we start to see the numbers of applications that are coming in. Also, the other piece of this is that we do have extensive cooperative agreements with a series of organizations who are poised, ready to help farmers navigate this process. And there will be more information forthcoming about how to access those cooperative agreements. One other quick question was about the business structure of the farmers being assisted. Business structure does not change the assistance, and doesn't it does not have bearing on whether the assistance there is there or not, as long as there's a farm number and those types of things. So, John, I'm going to come back to you on some questions on ECP and then switching over. On ECP, some of the same questions about being able to restore fertility, cover crops, mulching, things like that. There was also a question about not being able to burn. Are they able to use, and I apologize, I'm going to have to, they can use an air curtain burner or a biochar kiln? Are there restrictions on how a burn could happen or not? and both of those under the ECP authorization.
So first, Scott, pardon me, there was a question prior to the question about restoration, including mulching and cover cropping. So let me try to address that one first.
Sure.
That was the one that I needed to verify, and that was the question about purchasing equipment. Unfortunately, we do not cover the purchase of equipment. We only cover rental and associated labor costs. In terms of cover cropping and mulching, ECP and EFRP both will cover cover cropping and mulching. So that is that case. I've written down the questions, so if you'd like me to just go through them, Scott, and then if I miss anything. Also, there was a question about whether a business entity, how the farm is organized, whether that impacts the ability to access disaster assistance. That does not impact it on our end at all. There was a question of whether ELAP would cover transportation assistance for donations of feed. The answer to that question is yes. Feed above normal, donated feed for use above normal would be able to be reimbursed through the ELAP program. I should also make a note, Scott, because I think that these slides are going to be made available. We do have a typo on the ELAP slide that says that we would cover 180 days. It's actually 150 days. So we need to correct that before we send those out. We just caught that, and our apologies about that. And then there was a question also about burning, which you just raised. Right now, neither ECP nor EFRP specifically address the air curtain burners or the biochar kilns, but we're going to dig into that and see if that's something that we might be able to expand for that those practices. So stay tuned on that. And if I don't know if it's possible to get the contact information from that questioner, but we can follow up directly and or provide that update next week when we have this call again.
And John, one other question that just came in was about where to find more information on the practices under ECP. The best information at this point is in the fact sheet online, and I certainly recommend folks as you're looking at different programs, the fact sheets online are always very helpful to work from. But if someone is looking for more specifics on the on what practices are eligible under ECP and the practice codes, is there a place for them to find that information?
So two things to that point, Scott. First of all, I note that there was a question about staffing that you addressed moments ago. I should mention as well that our team, part of my division is the conservation division, which oversees ECP and EFRP at FSA. They are holding regular office hours with affected states starting about 2 weeks ago to provide immediate feedback to questions like this in the field. So best real-time information is to work with your local staff. They have a good deal of knowledge based not only on those office hours, but based on training that they have been receiving really since last spring on EC generally, not just specific to this hurricane event. The second thing is that we are working with the department on providing some better communications tools to discuss both ECP, EFRP, emergency EQIP, other NRCS programs that will be sort of a more holistic document to provide that information to producers and stakeholders to share with their growers. So I would start local, look at those communications tools. That fact sheet that you referenced, Scott, is a very good reference document and may allow for producers to start thinking about some of those more narrow questions, like this discussion about air curtain burners or biochar kilns. You know, it may not be listed, but having that input from producers in the field is what lends itself to us having discussions where we might be able to get some of those practices as part of what we reimburse. So I hope that's helpful, but that's where I would suggest is going local first.
Thank you very much, John. And I would reinforce that we know that these storms and the damages are playing out in very different ways in different parts of the country. We strongly encourage folks to be in contact with us about how it is playing out for farmers in your area or for you as a person going through it, so that we can look at emerging issues and look at places where we might be able to find flexibilities or find ways of addressing issues. And part of that is, certainly through your county office. It is also contacting us here or through the call center. But as we've said, the best thing to do is to be in touch with your county office, to stay in touch with your county office, work with them closely on the practices and the coverage as it exists. John, let me come back with one other question, and I'm going to follow it up on it from me. You said earlier that under the ELAP feed transportation, if there were people who were donating feed, donating hay, who would apply for that? Would it be the person who's receiving it? It would be the person transporting it? And are there restrictions on distances or those types of things under ELAP that, because we know that there's been quite a bit of donations of hay and feed going, traveling significant distances.
Yeah, so the ELAP, first of all, to your question about the sort of the distance question. First of all, we reimburse over 25 miles and up to 1,000 miles. We recognize that there is a broad geographic region that is impacted by this and other natural disasters, so we have provided that flexibility for much of the course of the past year and a half or so. Secondly, in terms of the donated feed, the livestock feed transportation assistance is limited to the livestock producer. So while that transportation is eligible for a reimbursement, the applicant would be the livestock producer themselves.
We have another question in the chat. Can you speak to how the programs apply to producers that have losses due to power outages? I'm assuming this is something like, you had product in a cooler or a packing shed or something like that, lost power and lost the quality of product or something like that. Anything that you can say about losses associated with the storms, but due to the loss of power?
Well, I think, I want to verify this, but as we have done in the past, Scott, where there are losses that are a result of power that is a result of the natural disaster, they are still eligible losses. So we would treat them in essence the same way. And I think that, I don't know that I can be much more direct about that. I think that's the answer that I would provide. So if you lost power due to high winds, if you lost power due to a flood event, if you lost power because your transformer blew up as a result of these storms, that would be an eligible cause of loss.
And again, this is a place where folks need to be in touch with their county office, talk through it with your county office, and make sure that we'll work with you as much as we possibly can.
Yeah, and I would just sort of reinforce that, Scott, again, and I can't stress enough, the value of our employees in the field is really second to none. But in this particular case, when we're talking about something like this, sort of the euthanizing of animals that are suffering as a result of the storms, et cetera, we have directed our staff in the field to be very, very open to these kinds of questions about causation of loss, about causation of an animal loss, et cetera, to make sure that they're recognizing that this is, we're not going to have a cookie cutter approach to this. because of the variety of different damage that is experienced as a result of hurricane, whether it's high winds or it's flooding or it's down trees that impact something, whatever, all of those could be considered causes of loss under our various different standing disaster programs.
Thank you, John. I'm not seeing any more questions in the chat. I would encourage folks to please follow up with us. While we're wrapping up, John and Jerry, I want to come back to you just real quick for any closing thoughts, anything, any wrap up that you want to have, anything that you think we need to make sure that we covered.
The only thing that I would reference, Scott, is the disaster information on farmers.gov is updated real time as changes are made. So I would encourage participants here to look there for any additional updates on farmers.gov/disaster. If you only go to farmers.gov, it's the banner on that website. There is, a lot of moving pieces here, and as changes are made, that may be your best source of information.
Jerry, any closing thoughts?
My last thought would be for our partners out here, as you're working with your producers, and you can do this at a local level, just as we're doing here with at the national level. Have these conversations at your state level. Visit with your state conservationist and his staff to make sure you're getting the most up-to-date information. So we look forward to addressing any of your questions that we didn't get to today, but there will be more to come as we all work together to get through these impacts that have happened to us. I saw some of the comments coming in from North Carolina. North Carolina's home. I was there over the weekend and had an opportunity to tour some of the locations, and it's while devastating, this too is something that we can all come together and hopefully overcome at some point. So appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you, Jerry, very much. As a reminder, the place to go for information and also for the recordings of these webinars is on farmers.gov. That we update that information in real time. It's the best source for the latest of what we're able to share with you. We appreciate everyone being here today. Our partners and our partners share a critical role in providing the assistance to folks across the region and making sure that people have access to the disaster assistance that they desperately need and are eligible for. We thank you for your work, your continued work, and please know that we are in it for the long haul and here to be as responsive as we can be. I can say that off of these meetings, off of these webinars, off of the emails that we get, the comments that we get from other sources, we are actively looking at how we can address the needs that are out there, how we can any additional flexibilities or waivers that we're able to do. We're under our authorization, and so we welcome your feedback, your comments, more information about your specific situations. And we look to you for helping us ensure that everyone is aware of the assistance that's out there and can fully participate in the assistance that is present, and that would help them through this time. If you have questions, comments, or other things that you'd like to talk through, or if there are specific subjects in disaster assistance programs across FPAC, that is NRCS, the Risk Management Agency, the Farm Services Agency, if there are any specific programs or issues that you would like us to spend more time on in depth, please let us know as we are planning for additional future meetings and additional future webinars like this one. We will do our best to keep you posted and to let you know as things are occurring. And as we are not seeing any more questions, please feel free, if you have questions following this, to follow up with us. But if not, this concludes our briefing, and good luck to all of you. Have a great day. Thank you very much for attending.